How can the absolute paralysis of the will be maintained in thousands of people? Through the regulated randomness of death. In 1943, one man turned the act of waking up into a lottery of liquidation. Amon Göth stepped onto the balcony of his villa. The building stood on a natural elevation. Below it lay the Appelplatz, the assembly square where thousands of prisoners gathered for the morning roll call. The distance was exactly 50 meters. At this range, a Mauser rifle does not miss. The morning silence broke with the metallic rasp of a bolt cycling. Göth did not look for enemies. He looked for targets. Below, skeletal figures in striped uniforms moved between the barracks. Joseph Bau, prisoner 69,084, stood among them. 69,084, a number on a list, waiting for a bullet. Göth raised the rifle with the calm of an athlete at practice. He chose a man at random. A slow breath, a steady squeeze. The shot echoed off the villa walls. The target collapsed instantly. Around him, the formation remained frozen. Moving to help meant joining the dead. Prisoners watched their comrades writhe on the dirt, bleeding out in the cold morning air. No one broke rank. No one reached out. Göth lowered the rifle and went back inside to finish his breakfast. The wounded man lay on the stones until he stopped moving. In 18 months, the morning ritual on the balcony evolved into a cog of a massive logistical engine. The Nazi state demanded industrial efficiency. Amon Göth provided a theater of private sadism. This was the intersection of Himmler's systemic genocide and one man's erratic cruelty. The infrastructure of Płaszów functioned as a high-capacity transit hub. Bureaucrats sorted piles of paper. Clerks categorized thousands of names. Every arrival meant a new entry in the camp's ledger. The air never cleared. The smell of coal dust from constant transport trains settled on every surface. 150,000 transit prisoners passed through these gates. This number equals the entire population of a mid-sized European city. Most were merely pausing. Their final destination was Auschwitz. The SS hierarchy designed death as a specialized profession. But Göth sought more than state-sanctioned execution. He demanded total psychological collapse. To him, the prisoner was not just a target, but a medium for humiliation. The camp reached its limit. At the peak of its operations, Płaszów held 25,000 permanent prisoners, 8,000 dead. This is the documented result of one man's personal initiative. Among the 150,000 transit prisoners passing through the gates, the commandant maintained his own autonomous tally of liquidations. The statistics of his career exceed the combat losses of a full Wehrmacht infantry division. Amon Göth did not merely manage a camp. He industrialized murder through 3 Jewish ghettos. During these liquidations, he personally executed dozens of women and children at close range. According to SS records, his methods included hanging victims from meat hooks and training dogs to tear living prisoners apart. Every morning began on a villa balcony. Göth used a sniper rifle to practice marksmanship on prisoners working below. It was not discipline, it was entertainment. He viewed the camp population as a moving target range. His cruelty eventually reached a threshold that threatened the internal image of the organization. Before the war ended, the SS itself intervened. They arrested Göth for excessive brutality and unauthorized sadism. The career of the Viennese radical ended in a cell designated for his own kind. The SS arrested him in 1944. The arrest in 1944 marked a temporary pause in a career built on systemic slaughter. 2 years earlier, the trajectory was different. In 1942, the SS transferred Göth to Lublin. This was the nerve center of Operation Reinhard. The headquarters hummed with a specific quiet industry. Functionaries moved between desks. Official directives rustled on wooden tables. Architects finalized blueprints. What was the specific nature of these new sites? They did not house prisoners. They existed only to kill. Lublin served as the conceptual laboratory for total liquidation. Here, the SS integrated logistical precision with mass murder. By the end of the operation, the regime killed over 1.7 million people. It remains the most concentrated phase of the Holocaust. Göth studied the maps. he absorbed the protocols of the state. To the east, 3 specialized facilities waited: Treblinka, Sobibor, and Belzec. These were not labor camps, they were death factories. Every gate, every ramp, and every gas chamber was an engineering solution to a biological problem. Göth arrived in Poland to serve as a technician of this machinery. The German administration designated Treblinka, Sobibor, and Belzec as pure extermination centers. Experience gained at the Lublin headquarters dictated the specific nature of his next assignment. In February 1943, the SS command transferred Göth to the outskirts of Krakow. He became the 3rd SS commandant of a new facility. It was not a site chosen at random. The Nazis selected the suburb of Płaszów for its psychological weight. The camp's foundation rested directly upon 2 Jewish cemeteries. It was an engineering project of desecration. Laborers uprooted thousands of limestone slabs. They shattered the memory of generations. The sound of cracking headstones under the treads of construction equipment signaled the start of the project. Solid stone became common rubble. The SS used these sacred gravestones as cheap building material for the foundations of the barracks. Officers walked on floors paved with the names of the dead. Płaszów was a geography of degradation. To the world, the administration maintained a facade of productivity. They erected a formal sign over the entrance to the territory of terror, officially designating the site as a labor camp. The career of a professional executioner accelerated after the Anschluss in March of 1938. Before this, the SS was a shadow of its future self. In 1929, the organization numbered only 280 men. By the time of the Austrian annexation, it had mutated into a continental machine of state control. Heinrich Himmler required more than just soldiers. He needed administrators of terror. The expansion created a bureaucratic lift. Göth stepped inside. He returned to Vienna not as a fugitive, but as a conqueror. In the city, he maintained a dual existence. On one side, he cultivated a facade of bourgeois respectability with his second wife and family. On the other, he was a functionary in a cult of violence. The contrast was absolute. In the morning, he played the role of a middle-class father in a Viennese apartment. In the afternoon, he managed the logistics of human misery. Göth never bothered with racial theories or intellectual debates. He was a manager of death. He was an executive willing to handle the filthiest tasks of the Reich. This efficiency did not go unnoticed. His ascension through the ranks became inevitable. The bureaucratic machinery finally placed him in his definitive role in 1942. Why would a son of a wealthy family choose a life of a fugitive? For Amon Göth, a radical underground cell offered something the publishing business could not: the legalization of violence. This recruitment into the apparatus of terror began in the Austrian shadows in 1931. He was 23 years old. At an age when his peers built careers, Göth joined the Austrian Nazi Party. This was no social trend. The movement was illegal. Membership was a direct strike against the state. The air in the basement meetings smelled of damp concrete and cheap tobacco. Men whispered in the dark. In 1932, he took a step further and joined the SS. This elite paramilitary force operated in total secrecy. The scale of the movement remained marginal. Before the ban, the Austrian Nazi Party counted fewer than 80,000 members. To join was to become a professional pariah. Göth embraced the role. He organized secret cells. He coordinated sabotage. He participated in political violence across Vienna. The SS was his laboratory for brutality. He did not just follow orders. He sought the friction of illegal action. The Austrian police eventually closed in. Raids dismantled the safe houses. The risk of the gallows became real. Göth did not wait for the handcuffs. He abandoned his life and fled across the border. The escape across the border was not a flight into the unknown. It was a return to the roots of a deep historical resentment. Amon Leopold Göth was a child of the collapse. He was born in 1908. Vienna was the beating heart of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. His father owned a successful publishing house. The printing presses hummed day and night. The smell of fresh ink and expensive paper filled the family estate. It was a life of bourgeois stability. Young Amon grew up in the center of European culture. Nothing predicted the transition from the library to the execution pit. Then came the Great War. Göth was only 6 years old when the world began to tear itself apart. For 6 years, the boy watched the slow death of his reality. The conflict did not just end, it erased the map. The Treaty of Versailles dismantled the empire. Austria lost more than 60% of its territory overnight. A sprawling multi-ethnic power became a tiny, fragmented republic. The streets of Vienna were no longer centers of culture. They were corridors of poverty and humiliation. The city was an incubator. Thousands of veterans returned to a country that no longer existed. This was the breeding ground for radicalism. Most Austrians viewed the new state as an artificial construct. It was a political shell with no future. Post-war Austria remained an economic ruin and a demographic ghost. The product of Viennese resentment found its laboratory on February 11, 1943. On that day, the gates of Płaszów opened for its new commander. 2,000 prisoners stood in the mud. The camp was a raw wound of construction and expansion. Most SS officers delegated the killing to subordinates. They maintained a professional distance from the blood. Amon Göth broke the protocol of bureaucracy. He transformed the facility into a personal kingdom of sadistic theater. He needed to witness the agony. He needed to hear the pleas. For Göth, the terror was not just systemic, it was intimate. He stood over 6 feet 6 inches tall, exactly 2 meters of imposing authority. The physical presence was a weapon. From his balcony, his silhouette loomed over the barracks like a shadow. He didn't just command, he projected a constant physical threat onto the masses below. The heavy thud of officer boots on frozen ground signaled his approach. Prisoners didn't look at his face, they looked at his hands. Death in Płaszów followed no logic. It required no trial or transgression. A prisoner could die for a loose button, or for no reason at all. Göth simply pulled his Mauser from its holster and fired. To manage these 2,000 prisoners, the commandant implemented a strictly regulated protocol of physical punishments. Amon Göth did not merely delegate violence, he transformed it into a personal ritual. The SS Manual for Guards codified a specific psychological technique, forcing the victim to participate in their own torture. When a prisoner committed the slightest infraction, Göth administered the penalty himself. He called it the 25. The commandant stood 2 meters tall. He struck the victim's face repeatedly. The leather whip hissed as it cut the air. He watched the process with clinical satisfaction. The rawhide tore the skin. The prisoner's cheeks swelled and turned a deep, bruised blue. Teeth shattered against the gravel. Eyes filled with blood and involuntary tears. One specific victim, Jaunty Ba, endured this systematic degradation. Göth forced the prisoner to count every lash out loud. Each strike required a clear, audible number. If the victim faltered, the count returned to 0. A single mistake meant the torture started over. Exhaustion and pain led to errors, and errors led to an endless loop of violence. The goal was not the destruction of the body, but the total liquidation of human dignity. Amon Göth expanded his arsenal beyond the standard protocols. He integrated biological weapons into the daily life of the camp. 2 Great Danes named Ralph and Rolf served as his primary instruments of terror. These animals were naturally noble. Göth perverted them. He transformed them into living machines designed for one purpose: to tear human flesh. German Great Danes possess a bite force exceeding 16 atmospheres. This pressure is sufficient to crush human bone. A single command from Göth turned a silent animal into a lethal projectile. The dogs lived in a constant state of artificial aggression, yet their nature resisted Göth's conditioning. A Jewish prisoner was assigned as their permanent caretaker. He fed them. He cleaned their kennels. He treated them with quiet humanity. The animals responded. They developed a visible affection for the caretaker, preferring his presence to Göth's. This was an intolerable breach of the camp's racial hierarchy. Göth's narcissism could not withstand the fact that his own dog showed more loyalty to a Jew than to him. The commander viewed this as a personal betrayal. Göth ordered the immediate execution of the Jewish caretaker. On March 13, 1943, the liquidation of the Krakow ghetto transformed 20 hectares of the Podgórce district into a high-speed conveyor of death. For 2 years, 15,000 people had endured extreme overcrowding and starvation behind these walls. To many, the ghetto was a brutal cage. To others, it was an illusion of security. They believed labor equaled life. That morning, the SS units tightened the perimeter. Metal voices from the loudspeakers shattered the silence. The orders echoed off the stone walls of Podgórce. Everyone out. Every house emptied. The streets became a sorting floor for human cargo. What was the official destination for these transports? The Nazi bureaucracy recorded the movement as resettlement to the east. In reality, the tracks led directly to the gas chambers of Auschwitz-Birkenau. Amon Göth moved through the chaos with a whip in one hand and a pistol in the other. He was a massive figure against the backdrop of terrified families. He hunted the slow. He targeted the old. He killed without a specific trigger. 50 children. Göth personally executed 50 small children during this single operation. These were not teenagers capable of labor. They were toddlers and infants with zero industrial value to the Reich. He viewed them as logistical obstacles. The commander separated them from their parents. He raised his weapon. He fired with mechanical efficiency until the street was clear. The sorting process reduced thousands of lives to clinical categories. Those deemed fit for work marched toward the Płaszów labor camp. The rest faced the rail cars. Soldiers forced the elderly and the sick into the dark interiors of the freight wagons. While thousands of Jews were being loaded onto trains, a few individuals, like Helen Jonas Rosenzweig, were selected for a different fate. They were moved from the barracks to the villa. Their task? Maintaining the domestic life of the commandant. In the camp, death was industrial. In the villa, it was intimate. Helen stood in the laundry room. She held a heavy iron. Her first task for Amon Göth was a single white shirt. She did not know how to iron. Göth watched. He stepped forward and struck her across the face. "The girls in Vienna know how to iron," he shouted. He asked why she did not. Helen began to cry. He struck her again. In that moment, the girl from Krakow vanished. Survival required an instant, brutal maturity. Historical records categorize domestic servants in SS villas as a distinct class of forced labor. They were isolated from the mass of prisoners. They lived in constant proximity to the predator. To Göth, Helen was not a human being. She was a disposable tool. The commandant's mood dictated the law. He once told her that if a Jewish girl was smart enough to wash a window on a sunny day, she was smart enough to work for him. One streak on the glass could result in a bullet to the head. Her life depended entirely on the quality of a cleaned window. The absolute law of the commandant's villa shifted to the camp's medical bureaucracy on the 7th of May, 1944. Amon Göth organized a Gesundheitsaktion, a health action. In reality, it was a clinical culling of the weak. The assembly square became a stage for the grotesque. All prisoners stripped naked. They stood exposed under the open sky. SS officers and camp doctors moved between the rows. They searched for ribs protruding under skin. They looked for the tremor of a fever. High above the shivering crowd, loudspeakers began to play. The light, elegant melodies of Strauss waltzes drifted over the mud. Why play the music of Viennese ballrooms during a massacre? The SS used classical records as a documented tactical tool to suppress panic. The familiar rhythm of a waltz masked the mechanical horror of the selection. It kept the doomed moving in an orderly line. Beneath the speakers, banners displayed a cynical lie. For each prisoner, a suitable job. The process was methodical. A doctor glanced at a woman's face. She was too old. He pointed to the left. A man coughed once. He was pulled from the line. God himself paced the square, overriding medical opinions with a flick of his whip. He didn't care for diagnosis. He sought to fill a quota. The inspection lasted for hours. By evening, the doctors in Göth had finalized the lists. Those deemed unfit were loaded into trucks. The destination was not a sanitarium or a new labor site. It was the gas chambers of Auschwitz. The final tally for the day reached exactly 1,400 prisoners. Beyond official quotas for the 1,400 deportees, the survival rate in Płaszów depended on a single man's pulse. Amon Göth turned the morning formation into a lottery of bone and lead. On one occasion, he scanned the ranks and stopped. A prisoner stood too tall. His height was his only crime. Göth drew his pistol. One shot. The man collapsed, lungs punctured, gasping in the dirt. Then came the detail that broke the witnesses. As the victim writhed in his final agony, Göth stepped forward. He unzipped his trousers. He urinated on the dying man in front of the entire assembly. Did physical traits dictate death? Sometimes. Other times, it was a sound. On August 3, 1943, the camp watched a 16-year-old boy named Hantok ascend the gallows. His offense was a song. He had sung a Russian melody. The rope tightened. The boy died for a rhythm. Logic had dissolved entirely. Engineer Kraut followed Hantok to the noose shortly after. Kraut had made a private comment about the guards. Göth claimed these acts incited mutiny among the Ukrainian auxiliaries. It was a bureaucratic lie. According to survivors, the commandant simply enjoyed the mechanics of the gallows. The degradation deepened for the sick. One prisoner suffered from chronic diarrhea, a side effect of the camp's starvation rations. He could not reach the latrines in time. He was soiled. When Göth discovered the mess, he did not reach for his holster immediately. He forced the man to eat his own excrement. Only after this final rupture of human dignity did Göth fire the shot. The victims had violated no standing orders. This irrationality was strictly codified into the camp protocols through the institutionalization of collective punishment. Amon Göth transformed his office into a laboratory of mechanical agony. A heavy steel hook was bolted into the ceiling. Guards hauled the accused prisoner upward by the legs. The victim hung suspended and upside down. Göth then signaled his dogs. The animals lunged at the rotating, helpless body. The screams echoed through the walls of the command building. Nearby workers heard every sound. They understood a single truth. Anyone could be next. Where did this system of selection originate? The method was a direct reconstruction of punitive practices from ancient Rome. In the year 471 BC, Roman commanders used decimation to crush mutinous legions. Göth revived it for the 20th century. If a single prisoner escaped, the entire work group was marched onto the assembly square. They formed a rigid line. Göth ordered them to count out loud. 1, 2, 3. Every 10th man was pulled from the formation. The execution followed immediately. In 1946, a tribunal classified this practice as the highest form of psychological terror. It functioned as a mathematical slaughter. The system aimed to incinerate human solidarity. Each prisoner began to view his neighbor not as an ally, but as a potential death sentence. There was no documented link between those killed during decimation and the actual fugitives. The calculated horror of mathematical decimation found its parallel in total unpredictability. Survival in Płaszów did not depend on labor or obedience. It depended on the distance from one man. Anna Duklauer-Pearl witnessed this vacuum of logic firsthand. Amon Göth once ordered the execution of her close friend. The charge was not sabotage or attempted escape. The victim died because of his pre-war bank account. Göth decided that former wealth was a capital offense in the present. Was there any pattern to the killings? None existed. This was the psychological phenomenon of learned helplessness. In clinical terms, the prisoners realized that no strategy could reduce the risk of death. One man woke up, finished his shift, and returned to the barracks. Another man, identical in behavior and status, was shot before noon. The camp operated without a functional code of conduct. Göth replaced regulations with his own fluctuating moods. Victims were selected for the shape of their glasses or the way they held a shovel. This randomness transformed every minute into a form of existential paralysis. The prisoners processed their meager rations in silence. After 12 hours of labor, they retreated to their bunks. No one could guarantee they would see the next sunrise. The psychological disintegration of the prisoners relied on a massive physical infrastructure. Płaszów did not function as a prison. It operated as a multi-purpose killing ground. Statistical annihilation defined the limestone quarry. On March 14, 1944, the administration cleared space for new arrivals. 300 people stood at the edge of the jagged cliffs. SS guards opened fire. The bodies struck the stones below with a heavy, rhythmic thud. In the camp crematorium, the process turned industrial. Executioners strangled 1,100 prisoners using meat hooks fixed to the ceiling. Among the dead was at least one child. The camp architecture included a specialized execution barn. This facility utilized a Genickschussanlage, a neck-shooting installation identical to the one in Buchenwald used for Soviet prisoners of war. An SS guard stood behind a wooden partition. The prisoner faced the wall. A narrow slit in the timber revealed only the target. The executioner remained invisible. One muffled shot to the nape of the neck. The victim never saw the face of death. For others, the end was slow. The solitary confinement block served for multi-week torture sessions. On the parade ground, public gallows held bodies in the wind as a permanent warning. Survival became a matter of spatial geometry. Prisoners like Poldek Pfefferberg learned to map the camp by sound. They memorized the heavy cadence of boots and the specific timbre of a single voice. Every sense remained tuned to one variable. Living or dying depended exclusively on the physical distance to the commandant. The mechanical efficiency of Płaszów's executions shifted to the streets of Tarnów on September 2, 1943. Amon Göth arrived before dawn. He brought 200 SS soldiers. Their task was the final liquidation of a population once totaling 25,000. By this morning, only 8,000 remained. The ghetto functioned as a human sorting office. Göth split the area into two zones, Section A for the employed, Section B for the useless. He ordered the workers into the second zone. They gathered in silence. Cardboard signs hovered above the crowd, bearing the names of German employers. These scrap pieces of paper were the only barrier between a labor contract and a bullet. Selection followed a rigid industrial logic. Göth picked 300 prisoners to form a cleaning column. Their job, scrub the streets of blood and collect the fresh corpses. Amidst the sorting, a young woman broke rank. She approached the commandant with a simple request. She asked to join her fiancé's work group. Göth did not speak. He pulled his Luger and fired one shot into her head. The body fell. Göth stepped over it and continued the selection. He killed between 30 and 90 women and children personally that day. Chaos made an exact count impossible. By evening, the logistics of the massacre were complete. 10,000 people were loaded onto cattle cars bound for Płaszów, while 4,000 others were sent directly to the gas chambers of Auschwitz. Amon Göth did not walk the perimeter with a clipboard. He carried a rifle. In the Krakow region, administrative power meant the right to kill on sight. This was not mere management. It was a promotion into the mechanics of regional genocide. On March 13, 1943, the SS issued a new mandate. Göth was no longer just a camp commandant. He became the architect of liquidation for the entire Krakow district. This appointment effectively erased the borders of Płaszów. His jurisdiction now covered every street, every basement, and every hidden room in the surrounding ghettos. One man held absolute authority over tens of thousands of lives across the province. The transition from administrator to executioner was seamless. Göth rejected the safety of a distant office. He preferred the front lines of the purge. During the clearing of the ghettos, he moved through the crowds with deadly enthusiasm. He did not just coordinate the terror, he personally fired into the huddles of men, women, and children. Göth led the operations by pulling the trigger. 700 bodies fell into the prepared pits of the Tarnowiec forest on September 21, 1943. As they hit the dirt, their possessions began a different journey. The liquidation of the Shebny labor camp near Jaslo was not just an act of state terror, it was the foundation of a private shadow empire. SS Hauptsturmführer Grimmick, a veteran of the Lemberg and Rawa Ruska clearances, managed the killing. Commander Kellerman supervised the logistics. Both operated under the direct mandate of Amon Göth. While the trucks moved the living toward the forest 3 kilometers away, a parallel transport system moved their lives into crates. Under the economic laws of the Third Reich, every fur coat, every gold ring, and every piece of furniture belonged to the Reich Ministry of Economics. Göth ignored the law. The process was clinical. Prisoners were stripped before the pits. Sorters organized the haul. Piles of clothing and jewelry were packed for transit. At the secret warehouses in Brunlitz, the air stayed thick with the scent of expensive tobacco and high-end alcohol. Inside these rooms, Ruth Irene Calder, known as Majola, lived in a vacuum of luxury. She walked on looted carpets and wore furs taken from the dead. The Gestapo later discovered entire rooms overflowing with this contraband. Göth funded this lifestyle through a systematic theft that bypassed the state entirely. He financed a private aristocracy through the industrial plundering of 700 corpses a day. The accumulation of stolen wealth in Brunlitz created a direct conflict with the rigid bureaucratic codes of Heinrich Himmler. Göth saw no contradiction in his actions. He pledged absolute loyalty to the Reich while systematically robbing the state of its plundered assets. This was not a clash of morality, it was a clash of systems. The SS operated on cold, industrial efficiency. Himmler demanded professional discipline from his officers to mask the reality of mass murder. Göth was the opposite. He was disorderly, impulsive, and visibly sadistic. Does the system tolerate a butcher who enjoys the blood? Internal reports began to surface. Other SS officers in Krakow and Tarnow expressed a discreet, calculated disgust. They did not object to the genocide, they objected to the chaos. Göth turned liquidations into scenes of indiscriminate terror. He beat the elderly to death in the streets and tore children from their mothers, not for policy, but for entertainment. To the Nazi machine, his cruelty was an embarrassing lack of composure. The administrative apparatus of the SS could not ignore the deviation. Personal greed was a violation of the ideological purity Himmler sought to instill. While the state bureaucratized death, Göth personalized it. His private empire of furs and gold, built on the bodies of the deported, finally triggered a response from the internal courts. The system began a formal investigation. In March 1947, the Warsaw courtroom encountered a silence that once signaled death in the Płaszów labor camp. The Nuremberg trials focused on the cold gears of a bureaucratic machine. This trial was different. It dissected the anatomy of a single man's daily sadism. Witnesses stepped toward the wooden stand, one after another. Helen Jonas Rosenzweig, Leon Layson, Joseph Bau. Mietek Pemper took his place. He was the commandant's former secretary. He held the camp's internal secrets in his memory. Pemper described the administration of murder. The others described the physical sensation of fear. They spoke of the balcony. Amon Göth stood there every morning with a scoped rifle. He hunted humans from his terrace. 2 years had passed since liberation, but the trauma remained physiological. Leon Layson recounted the liquidation of the Tarnow ghetto. Joseph Bau reconstructed the atmosphere of the camp square. The witnesses described a specific sound, the rhythm of Göth's boots on the gravel. Panic was instantaneous. Thousands of prisoners would tremble at the sight of his silhouette. They developed desperate, frantic strategies to remain invisible. The uncertainty was a weapon. It eroded sanity. One witness recalled the attack dogs. Another described the selections where Göth's finger decided who breathed another hour. This testimony bypassed the abstract numbers of the Holocaust. It provided the first historical record of personalized, daily homicide. September 13, 1944. The SS did not send a promotion or a new command to Płaszów. They sent an arrest warrant for their own. Why did the Gestapo arrest the butcher of Płaszów? For the systematic murder of thousands? No. They arrested him for the theft of state property and the black market sale of prisoner rations. The scene was clinical. SS officers arrived at his villa. They demanded his papers. They stripped him of his authority. In the twisted logic of the Third Reich, Göth had committed the ultimate sin. He had stolen from the Führer. The indictment was a masterpiece of legal hypocrisy. It ignored the children executed in ghetto liquidations. It ignored the prisoners torn apart by his dogs for sport. Under Nazi law, those deaths were official functions. The victims were enemies of the state. Their annihilation was the norm. But the property they left behind belonged to Berlin. Göth had confiscated Jewish gold, furs, and jewelry for personal enrichment. He operated a private shadow economy. While the Reich demanded every gram of looted wealth for the treasury, Göth filled his own pockets. The contrast was absolute. Murdering a prisoner was a duty. Stealing that prisoner's suitcase was a felony. The bureaucracy even tracked the hunger. Official camp rations were designed for slow starvation. It was a calculated, industrial process. Göth disrupted the machine. He siphoned off these meager supplies to sell them on the black market. The state did not care that the Jews were starving. It cared that Göth was profiting from the starvation. He had reduced the caloric intake below the officially stipulated misery levels, pocketing the difference in Reichsmarks. Order was the only deity left. The third charge focused on paperwork. Göth had administered lashings and executions without filing the correct forms. He had allowed unauthorized personnel to view sensitive camp records. To the SS judiciary, these were not atrocities. They were administrative violations. It saw deviations from the code. George Conrad Morgan took the case. He was the blood judge of the SS. A bureaucratic purist, Morgan did not seek justice for the victims. He sought order for the machine. He had already broken Karl Koch, the commander of Buchenwald, for embezzlement. To Morgan, genocide was a state function. It required discipline. Personal gain and unauthorized killing were stains on the uniform. He focused his investigation on a specific breach of the Nuremberg laws. The target was Eleanor Hodes. She was an Austrian political prisoner at Auschwitz, a communist. Under the racial statutes of 1935, she was strictly off-limits. What was the nature of the racial disgrace at the heart of the SS investigation? Morgan uncovered a forced sexual relationship between the commandant and Hodes. She had become pregnant. To hide the evidence, the commander threw her into a standing cell, a concrete coffin where sleep was impossible. In 1943, she was released, only to undergo a forced abortion in the camp infirmary. Morgan interrogated both the commander and the victim. He meticulously documented the violation of racial purity. The SS viewed this as Rassenschande, racial shame. They ignored the thousands gassed daily, but obsessed over one unauthorized pregnancy. Morgan prepared the prosecution. He gathered the depositions. But the gears of the bureaucracy began to grind against the reality of the front lines. The Soviet Union pressed from the east. The Western Allies closed in from the west. Resources shifted from internal purges to total survival. The investigation stalled as the Red Army crossed the Vistula. The internal purges of the SS halted as the front lines collapsed. While Soviet and American pincers closed, the meticulous corruption files of Judge Morgan vanished into the archives of a dying state. The legal machinery of the Reich ceased to function. Survival replaced bureaucracy. Amon Göth did not meet the end on the ramparts of Płaszów. His body failed first. Years of excessive alcohol and systematic violence triggered a physical breakdown. SS doctors diagnosed him with severe diabetes. Then came the psychological verdict. Medical authorities of the SS officially declared Göth mentally ill. In the quiet halls of the psychiatric ward, the smell of antiseptic masked the distant thunder of heavy artillery. The butcher of Płaszów was no longer a commander. He was a patient in the Bavarian town of Bad Tolz. The diagnosis suggested a severe psychological disorder. Some records point to a complete mental collapse under the weight of his own paranoia. He remained in the clinic while the Red Army liberated the eastern camps and British tanks crossed the Rhine. Berlin became a graveyard of brick and steel. American troops captured the facility at Bad Tolz in May 1945. In July 1946, the American command finalized the extradition. The former commandant of Płaszów crossed the border under heavy guard. The transition was absolute. 2 years prior, this man operated as a secular god, deciding life and death with a casual wave of a hand. Now he was a broken prisoner. The transport moved toward Poland. Steel wheels ground against the rails. Inside the carriage, Amon Göth sat slumped, a shadow of the hunter who once stalked the camp balconies with a rifle. The clatter of the train echoed the collapse of his private empire. His body, ravaged by diabetes and the onset of mental decline, no longer matched the myth of the Aryan master. How did the system that created him finally turn on him? The answer lies in the ledger, not the holster. The SS did not arrest Göth for the thousands of Jews he murdered. They arrested him for the suitcases of gold he failed to hand over. In the Third Reich, genocide was a state duty, but personal enrichment was a capital offense. This was the core of the Nazi enterprise, a union of fanaticism and common theft. The regime institutionalized the kill but policed the loot. Göth represented the ultimate synthesis of this logic. He utilized the rhetoric of racial purity to mask the reflexes of a career criminal. Even among the ranks of the SS, his cruelty was distinct. While others managed the machinery of death, Göth sought the physical sensation of the kill. The investigation into his mental illness provided no shield. Sadism flourished under the swastika, encouraged by a state that rewarded the darkest human impulses. But the Polish authorities rejected the defense of insanity or the excuse of superior orders. Preparation for the tribunal began in a nation still clearing the rubble of the war Göth helped ignite. Legal teams from devastated nations began cataloging the evidence for the Supreme National Tribunal. Survivors of Płaszów arrived in Krakow to face the man who had treated them as target practice. They drafted 5 specific counts of crimes against humanity. The prosecution finalized the list of 8,000 confirmed murders attributed personally to Göth. The Supreme National Court of Poland convened on March 11, 1947. Warsaw lay in ruins. Only one building in the Płaszów district remained functional enough to house a trial of this magnitude. Why was the Polish Teachers' Union building chosen? It was the sole structure with an auditorium large enough to hold the weight of the evidence. Workers scrambled to install rows of specialized equipment. Wiring snaked across the floor for simultaneous translation. Microphones stood ready to broadcast the charges in multiple languages. The room held 500 people daily. The air inside was heavy. Most spectators were not tourists or journalists. They were survivors. Former prisoners of Auschwitz and Płaszów sat inches away from their tormentor. They had seen their families vanish into the smoke. Now they watched the man who gave the orders. The prosecution finalized 5 specific counts against Amon Göth. First, the direct murder of prisoners through beatings, torture, and the use of attack dogs. Second, the liquidation of the Krakow ghetto. Third, the destruction of the Tarnow ghetto, where Göth personally executed residents. Fourth, the liquidation of the Szebny labor camp. Fifth, the systematic theft of money and gold from his victims. 8,000 confirmed murders. This number was a mathematical floor, not a ceiling. It represented only the deaths the prosecution could link directly to his hand or his specific command. It excluded the thousands more who died of exhaustion in his camp or vanished in the gas chambers after his deportations. The evidence took physical form on the wooden tables. Prosecutors stacked administrative records and Gestapo reports. They produced photographs of Göth standing on his balcony, looking down at the camp like a god. Records from the SS detailed the exact amount of stolen assets found in his possession during his earlier arrest by the Nazis themselves. The trial functioned as a massive machine of documentation. 500 witnesses and observers watched the gears turn every single day. Amon Göth sat in the dock of the Supreme National Tribunal. He did not hide his face. He did not tremble. Witnesses recounted the executions on the Płaszów hills, but Göth remained unmoved. His face was a frozen mask of indifference. The defendant did not choose the path of denial. He admitted to everything. He held absolute authority. He possessed full permission for every execution. In his mind, the logic was simple and academic. He was a loyal officer. He was performing a difficult but necessary duty for the state. Remorse was absent because guilt did not exist in his ideological framework. The Jews were enemies of the Reich. The Reich demanded their destruction. Göth simply acted as the facilitator of that policy. According to his testimony, he was merely a tool of superior orders, a cog in a legal machine that had normalized mass murder. The trial reached its conclusion in the autumn of 1946. The court announced the final verdict on the 5th of September. The defense strategy followed a predictable pattern. Counsel for the accused leaned on the Führerprinzip, the principle of absolute obedience. They argued that Göth functioned merely as a mechanical part of the state. The lawyer's voice remained monotonous as he cited SS service regulations. He pointed to the final solution decrees issued by Berlin. He invoked the specific instructions of Heinrich Himmler regarding the treatment of Jewish prisoners. According to the defense, Göth was an officer fulfilling a duty. Every execution was framed as an authorized act known to his superiors. Every lashing was presented as disciplinary jurisdiction granted by German law. Did the uniform absolve the man? In 1945 and 46, this superior orders defense became the standard shield for Nazi defendants across Europe. It was a calculated attempt to dissolve individual guilt into the collective machinery of the Reich. If every man was a tool, then no man was a murderer. The Polish tribunal methodically dismantled this doctrine. The judges ruled that no law of war justifies the liquidation of defenseless civilians. A criminal regime cannot issue a legal order to commit a crime. The court acknowledged that orders might mitigate a sentence in rare cases, but they never serve as a total defense for mass murder. The evidence proved Göth moved far beyond any state directive. No order from Berlin required him to use a sniper rifle from his balcony for morning entertainment. No Himmler decree commanded him to train his Great Danes, Rolf and Alf, to tear human flesh. No official policy specified hanging victims from meat hooks to be eaten alive by dogs. No regulation mandated the act of urinating on the dying. These were not the implementations of a cold genocidal policy. They were the inventions of a private sadist. The court classified these acts as manifestations of personal cruelty. The court rejected every argument of the defense. On September 5, 1946, the judges declared the defendant guilty on all counts. Membership in the Nazi Party, systematic extermination of groups, personal orders for torture. But the verdict contained a phrasing that rewrote legal history: homicide. In previous war crimes trials, defendants faced charges of genocide or crimes against humanity. Those were bureaucratic labels. The Krakow tribunal went further. It convicted the individual for the specific physical act of murder. This was no longer just about the system. The law now recognized the man who pulled the trigger and the sadist who unleashed the dogs. The court distinguished between state-mandated violence and personal, bloodthirsty initiative. It established a precedent. An official position does not grant immunity for private cruelty. Superior orders provide no absolution. The sentence? Death by hanging. Other condemned men had collapsed. Some pleaded for mercy or screamed about their loyalty to the Reich. The defendant did not move. He listened to the word death as if reviewing a dull administrative report. No muscle in his face twitched. The mask of indifference remained. The verdict of the Supreme National Tribunal shifted the focus from the courtroom to the gallows. According to the official decree, the state scheduled the execution for September 13, 1946. The location was Montelupik Prison in Krakow. The site was not random. It stood a short distance from the ruins of the Płaszów concentration camp. The Ministry of Justice faced a critical decision regarding the nature of the execution. Only months earlier, the state had hanged Arthur Greiser, the Gauleiter of Wartheland, in Poznan. It was a public spectacle. Massive crowds gathered on the slopes of the citadel to watch the high-ranking Nazi die. The atmosphere was festive. Families brought children. Vendors moved through the masses, selling ice cream, soft drinks, and sweets to the spectators. After the drop, people fought over the hangman's rope, cutting it into macabre souvenirs. This carnival of death triggered a wave of backlash. Polish intellectuals and church officials sent formal letters of protest to the authorities. They argued that public executions degraded the very essence of justice. A solemn legal act had transformed into morbid entertainment. Following these protests, the Ministry of Justice revised its protocol to ensure the dignity of the law. The government officially designated the execution of the former commandant as a closed event. According to a revised protocol from the Ministry of Justice, the state restricted access to the prison grounds to exactly 100 official witnesses. The era of public spectacle had ended. Dawn at Montelupich prison brought the rhythmic sound of hammers against wood. German prisoners of war handled the timber. They spent the early hours erecting a heavy platform and a trapdoor. The irony was absolute. These soldiers were building the instrument of death for an SS officer. The security perimeter remained impenetrable. Guards in full uniform stood every 10 paces. No one passed without a special permit. Among the 100 invitees were prosecutors, ministry officials, and former prisoners of Płaszów. Victims stood ready to watch the hunter become the prey. 8 o'clock in the morning. Amon Göth arrived under heavy escort. He was led into the former commander's office of the prison. The man who had once decided who lived or died now had only one request. He asked for a cup of coffee. The guards brought it. Göth drank the liquid slowly, showing no outward signs of panic. It was a final, mundane indulgence. The guards finished the coffee and escorted him to the waiting cell. 10 minutes past 10 in the morning. 13 minutes and 3 attempts. This was the precise time the Polish judicial system required to physically eliminate the commandant of Płaszów. The guards opened the cell in block 11. This was the death block. Amon Göth emerged. Witnesses recorded a jarring serenity in his stride. How does a man who systematically denied thousands the right to a final prayer behave on the gallows? The court protocols recorded an unexpected, cold pedantry. He walked the main street of the camp with energetic steps. His hands were bound behind his back. The steel forced his chest forward and his chin up. He looked less like a condemned man and more like a commander reviewing a parade. This was the man who had shot prisoners from his balcony for sport. Now, he demanded the one thing he had never granted his victims: spiritual comfort. Father Tadeusz Zaremba waited at the edge of the pit. He was a Salesian priest from Auschwitz. Göth approached the wooden structure. Because his hands were cuffed, the executioners had to physically lift him onto the stool. He stood atop the trap door and scanned the crowd. He saw survivors. He saw people he had tortured. He saw those whose families he had erased. The priest began the final prayers. The executioner unfurled the rope. In a few seconds, this meticulously adjusted noose would snap and fail. But in this moment, Göth remained the director of his own macabre theater. As the hemp touched his skin, he didn't flinch. He moved his head with a slow, deliberate tilt. He adjusted the position of the rope with his own jaw. It was a gesture of final, obsessive control. The executioner stepped forward. A sharp kick sent the stool skittering across the wood. The weight of the body hit the trapdoor. The hatch swung open. Göth's frame vanished into the dark square of the floor. The biomechanics of a judicial hanging require a precise calculation of kinetic energy. The goal is an instantaneous fracture of the second cervical vertebra. If the rope is too long, the force decapitates the prisoner. If it is too short, the drop fails to break the neck. The result is slow strangulation. When the hatch opened for the first time, the biomechanics of the execution failed due to a technical error in the rope length. The fall was insufficient. Amon Göth remained suspended, gasping as the noose tightened around a functional windpipe. Executioners hauled the body back up to the platform. A second attempt followed. Again, the calculation failed. For the witnesses, the procedure shifted from a legal ritual to a rhythmic torture. How long does it take for a state to dismantle a man who specialized in industrial slaughter? The records show the process lasted 13 minutes. The executioner adjusted the tension for the third time. This drop was final. At 10:18 in the morning, Father Tadeusz Zaremba began the prayer for the dying. Göth's pulse fluctuated and then faded. At 10:21, a physician stepped forward to confirm the cessation of all vital functions. The Polish state then initiated the final phase of bureaucratic erasure. There would be no grave, no site for future pilgrimage, no physical evidence of the commandant's existence. Authorities transported the remains to a crematorium. The resulting ash was scattered into the Vistula River. Over 1,000 kilometers of moving water ensured the total anonymity of his remains. While the ashes dissolved in the Vistula, the visual evidence of the execution vanished into the vaults of the Polish Ministry of Justice. The state demanded a silent closure, no sensationalism, no public outcry. The newspapers received strict orders: keep the report brief. Eyewitness accounts were prohibited by law. Stanislav Danczak, the press photographer, captured the final moments on film. These negatives represented the last public execution ever held in Poland. For decades, the authorities kept them under lock and key. The metal safes of the ministry held the proof of the hangman's struggle. Then, at an unknown date, the negatives disappeared. They were erased from the official record. Did the executioner sabotage the gallows on purpose? Some historians suggest a deliberate delay. Others point to simple incompetence under the weight of the moment. There is no evidence for a conspiracy. The biomechanics of the failure remain a matter of technical friction and miscalculation. The collapse of the Göth legacy was not political, but personal. For his wife, Ruth Irene Calder, the truth arrived as a physical blow. She had lived in the villa at Płaszów. She had shared his bed while the camp burned outside their window. The realization of the industrial scale of his slaughter broke her. Her suicide was the final somatic response to the documentation of his crimes. In 2002, his daughter, Monika Hertwig, published her memoirs. She described the agonizing friction between the idealized father of her mother's stories and the mass murderer of the historical record. The family's internal collapse mirrored the state's attempt to bury the past. Today, the entire visual history of that morning in Krakow rests on 11 original prints. Monika Hertwig's 2002 memoirs forced a grim reassessment of the destruction her father authored during his 37 years of life. The scale of the void he created defies simple biography. One man, 37 years of life. In what is the historical weight of a death sentence measured? For the executioner, it is the physics of a falling body. For the victims, it is the erasure of entire generations. Amon Göth's career was a masterclass in demographic collapse. He oversaw the liquidation of the Krakow and Tarnow ghettos. These were not mere military operations. They were the systematic dismantling of centuries-old communities. Under his command, the Jewish population of Krakow dropped from 60,000 to nearly zero. He transformed vibrant urban districts into empty shells and mass graves. The disproportion is staggering. 8,000 people died in Płaszów alone. Thousands more went to the gas chambers on his orders. 1 decade of service, tens of thousands of lives extinguished. The end of this efficiency was a technical failure. On the gallows, the professional killer became a clumsy amateur. He requested a priest. He drank a final cup of coffee. He carefully adjusted the noose around his own neck, seeking a comfort he had denied to thousands. In those final seconds, the architect of the Holocaust's local machinery reached for the very human compassion he had spent a lifetime trying to destroy. After the gallows, the name of the commandant vanished into specialized archives. For decades, the public remembered the architects: Hitler, Himmler, Göring. They followed the televised trial of Adolf Eichmann in 1961. But the local executioners of the camps faded into the statistical fog of genocide. Amon Göth was merely one monster among thousands. The silence broke in 1980. Australian author Thomas Keneally entered a leather goods store in Beverly Hills. Inside, the air smelled of processed hides and expensive tannins. He was not looking for a story, he was looking for a briefcase. Behind the counter stood Leopold Pfefferberg. He was a survivor of Płaszów. For 35 years, Pfefferberg had carried the burden of a story no one wanted to hear. He showed Keneally the files. He spoke of a factory, a list, and 1,200 lives pulled from the fire. Keneally listened. The mechanics of a global myth began to turn in a small California shop. The author realized that the salvation of 1,200 workers in Brunlitz represented a fraction of a percent of the Holocaust's victims. Yet this narrow sample provided the perfect focal point for a narrative. In 1982, Keneally published Schindler's Ark. The book transformed obscure archival data into a gripping psychological duel. To make the heroism of the industrialist tangible, the narrative required a concrete antagonist. The story demanded a human personification of the terror that the workers had narrowly escaped. This literary necessity required the resurrection of a forgotten hangman. The antagonist found by Thomas Keneally materialized on a global scale in 1993. Steven Spielberg moved the story from the pages of a Booker Prize-winning novel to the silver screen. Academic studies on the Holocaust had reached thousands of readers. Spielberg's lens reached tens of millions. The director chose Ralph Fiennes for the role of the commandant. Fiennes began a systematic transformation to mirror the executioner. He studied archival photographs. He read the testimonies of those who survived Płaszów. To match the commandant's heavy, imposing frame, the actor underwent a rapid weight gain. He didn't just play a role, he reconstructed a monster. How did the film define pure evil for the modern era? The camera captures the villa balcony. Fiennes, as the commandant, holds a precision rifle. He smokes a cigarette. He takes aim at prisoners moving below like insects. He fires. This sequence crystallized a historical truth. For the victims, death was not a sentence. It was a random whim. Before the final credits, the film exposes the collapse of Nazi logic. The commandant corners his Jewish maid, Helen Hirsch. He confesses a distorted attraction. Then, he beats her. He cannot reconcile his physical desire with the ideology of racial subhumanity. He resolves the internal paradox through a burst of raw industrial violence. While the American Film Institute placed this cinematic monster 15th on its list of the 50 greatest villains, for those who survived Płaszów, the performance bypassed art and struck the nervous system. The portrayal of Amon Göth became a global cultural benchmark. Ralph Fiennes received an Oscar nomination and a BAFTA award for the role. Yet the boundary between the British actor and the historical butcher collapsed on the filming set. Mila Pfefferberg, a Płaszów survivor, arrived for a scheduled visit. She stood before Fiennes. He wore the high-collared SS tunic. The field gray wool was precise. The silver runes caught the light. Mila began to tremble. Her hands shook with an uncontrollable rhythmic frequency. The brain recognized the actor. The body recognized the predator. This somatic collapse revealed the neurobiology of a trauma that decades of silence could not erase. Fiennes's physical resemblance to Göth acted as a direct neurological trigger. The uniform was not a costume. It was a weaponized memory. The film's success institutionalized this trauma. Schindler's List won 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. It shifted from a Hollywood production to a mandatory educational standard in schools across the globe. By the end of its initial run, the cinematic reconstruction of the Holocaust reached 85 million viewers. While Spielberg's cinematic reconstruction integrated itself into global curricula, the physical reality of the Płaszów camp underwent a different process. Modern apartment complexes now stand flush against the unmarked perimeter. Residents walk dogs where the gallows once stood. Urban expansion has effectively swallowed the topography of mass murder. The system of memory in Poland created a hierarchy of sites. Auschwitz became a museum, a global monument. Dachau and Buchenwald transformed into educational centers with guides and plaques. Płaszów became a void. Before the final evacuation in late 1944, the SS demolished the barracks. They dismantled the fences. They attempted to erase the logistics of the crime before the Red Army arrived. According to archaeological data, The site became an urban anomaly. Vegetation reclaimed the ruins. By the 1990s, the camp was merely an empty field without maps or signs. This geographic amnesia mirrored the internal state of the commandant's family. Amon Göth's daughter, Monika Hertwig, was born in 1945. She grew up within a domestic fiction. Her mother, Ruth Irene Calder, maintained a rigid narrative. In this version, Göth was a patriotic officer and a devoted father. He was a victim of post-war injustice. The psychological collapse occurred when the archives opened. Monika discovered that her father's patriotism consisted of shooting prisoners from his balcony for sport. The family myth disintegrated. In 2002, she published her memoirs, officially acknowledging the monstrosity of her father's legacy. In 2004, a woman born in the year of the Reich's collapse sat across from a ghost of her father's past. Monika Hertwig, daughter of the commandant, met Helen Jonas Rosenzweig. Helen had been the slave maid in the villa at Płaszów. The recorded audio captures a collision of two worlds. One woman seeking atonement for a monster she never knew. The other, a survivor, offering a harrowing testimony of the man who held her life in his hands. This encounter forced sociologists to reevaluate the very anatomy of the killers who built the Holocaust. Not all executioners were the same. Academics identify clear tiers of complicity. Adolf Eichmann represented the bureaucratic killer. He was the architect of logistics, moving millions across map coordinates from a quiet office. Rudolf Höss, the commandant of Auschwitz, acted as the industrial manager. He oversaw the mechanics of the gas chambers, but maintained a cold, professional distance from the immediate act of murder. Then there was the third category, the contact killer. The sadist requires more than a statistical report. He needs to see the skin break. He needs the visual confirmation of agony to feel his own power. Amon Göth did not hide behind a desk or a chain of command. He chose the balcony. He chose the rifle. He transformed the state's mandate for genocide into a private, tactile ritual of pain. The Nazi system provided the legal permission. Göth provided the personal craving for blood. He integrated the institutional machine of death into a daily, individual performance of violence. Historians identify a specific symbiosis in the Third Reich. It was not a glitch. It was a legalized option. The Nazi regime provided the institutional permission. Individuals like Amon Göth provided the clinical pathology. During the liquidation of the Krakow ghetto, Göth chose to stand on the front line. He did not delegate. He did not stay in his office. He watched the bullets hit. Most camp commanders operated through bureaucracy. They managed death from a distance. Göth turned every execution into a personal, tactile ritual. The system created the context. Göth chose the cruelty. He could have administered Płaszów without the theater of torture. He could have minimized his presence. He did neither. From his youth in Vienna to his final days in a cell, the trajectory remained constant. Ideology was the excuse. Personal pleasure was the motive. Thousands of victims paid for this specific psychological profile. The end arrived in 1946. In Krakow, the executioner failed twice. The rope was the wrong length. Göth waited. The man who denied his victims a moment of dignity now faced death as a vulnerable mortal. He sought spiritual comfort. He looked for human compassion. On the third attempt, the trapdoor opened. The sentence was carried out in Krakow on September 13, 1946.